"Wrong floor, sweetheart. Cafeteria's 2 levels down." He said it without turning all the way around. Just a quarter turn, one shoulder toward her, the way a person addresses something they have already decided is not worth their full attention. He was standing outside the surgical suite doors in full scrubs, and he waved his hand in the general direction of the elevator, once, the way you wave off a fly, and turned back to his resident. She did not move toward the elevator. She walked past him, not around him, past him, through the surgical suite doors, directly past Dr. Lawrence Whitfield III, the most decorated cardiothoracic surgeon at Mercy General Hospital, and down the hall to the conference room at the far end, the one with the long oak table and the 12 chairs and the glass wall that looked out over the surgical floor. She sat down at the head of the table. Dr. Whitfield followed her down the hall because that is what a man does when he cannot understand what he is seeing. He pushed open the conference room door. He said, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is the surgical suite," and she looked up at him. She placed one item on the table in front of her. She had been carrying it in the inside pocket of her white coat, a folded letter, single page, hospital letterhead. She unfolded it and slid it across the table. He did not pick it up right away. He should have. Nobody in that hospital had any idea who she was, not yet. But in 7 minutes, when the rest of the department heads filed into that room for the 9 o'clock meeting, every single one of them was going to find out. And Dr. Lawrence Whitfield III, in his 22 years at this institution, had never once had to learn something about someone in a room full of witnesses before. He was about to. Have you ever been told to find the cafeteria when you belonged at the head of the table? Have you ever been waved off by someone who hadn't even looked at your face? Let me take you back. 2 weeks earlier. To the morning Diane Okafor got the phone call she had been waiting for 4 months. Diane Okafor woke at 5:15 the way she always did, not to an alarm but to the particular quality of that hour, the way it sat differently than every other hour, heavier and quieter and full of possibility that hadn't yet been used. She lived in a small house in the Rosemont neighborhood, 15 minutes from the hospital if she drove, 22 if she took the bus, which she often did because she liked the interval. The 22 minutes in which she was neither at home nor at work and could hold both at arm's length and breathe. The house had been her grandmother's. Eugenia Okafor had raised 3 children and 12 grandchildren in those 700 square feet and had kept a garden in the back that produced, improbably and reliably, the most extraordinary tomatoes anyone in the neighborhood had ever tasted. She died at 88. She had never once been to a hospital, which was either a miracle or a testament to the tomatoes, depending on who you asked. She left the house to Diane because she said Diane was the one who would make something of it without changing it. Diane hadn't changed a thing. The garden still grew. The front window still had the same curtain with small blue flowers on it. The kitchen table still had the same burn mark from a pot set down wrong in 1987. And on the refrigerator, next to a photograph of Eugenia in the garden holding a tomato that was genuinely the size of a small melon, Diane had taped a card that said, "Every door you walk through, you carry everyone who couldn't." Diane Okafor was 41 years old. She had been a registered nurse for 16 years. For the past 9 of those years, she had specialized in perioperative nursing, the care of patients before, during, and after surgical procedures. She was certified in cardiac surgery nursing and had completed a postmaster's clinical education in surgical team coordination. She held 3 certifications that a significant percentage of surgeons in her hospital did not hold. She had published 2 papers in nursing journals, one on communication protocols in cardiac surgery suites, one on handoff error reduction in overnight shifts, and had been cited in a 3rd paper she had not written. She had applied for the position of Director of Perioperative Services at Mercy General Hospital 4 months before the phone call came. It was a position that had been open for 6 months before she applied. It had been open for that long because the hospital had gone through a failed search, a reconstituted committee, and a round of internal candidates who had all withdrawn or declined. Diane's application had been submitted on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she had received a request for an interview. By the end of the following week, she had met with the committee 3 times. The committee had been honest with her in a way she appreciated. They told her the position had historically been held by physicians. They told her there would be people in the hospital who would object to a nurse holding it. They told her the objections would not be voiced directly. She said she understood. She said she would like to know what the position needed and let her qualifications speak to that. They said that was exactly the right answer. The phone call at 5:15 on a Tuesday morning was the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Sandra Lin, calling personally to offer her the position. "Doctor, Lynn was not a person who called personally for things that could be done administratively. Diane understood that the call was also a message, a signal of institutional backing. She said yes. She said thank you. She said she would need a week to give her current team proper notice. Dr. Lynn said, "Take two." Then she said, "One more thing. Your first formal responsibility will be chairing the departmental review meeting on the 19th. 9 o'clock, surgical suite conference room. I'll have your paperwork ready before that." The paperwork included her appointment letter. She folded it into the inside pocket of her white coat the morning of the 19th. She had been wearing that white coat for 11 years. The left sleeve had a faint ink mark above the cuff that she had tried to remove twice and given up on. Her grandmother would have called it character. She arrived at 9:02. The elevator opened on the surgical floor and she stepped out and moved toward the suite doors, and that was when Dr. Lawrence Whitfield III had turned a quarter turn and told her the cafeteria was 2 levels down. She was going to come back to that. But first things first, Dr. Whitfield was standing in the doorway of the conference room, holding the letter at arm's length now, reading it the way people read things that are rearranging their understanding of the last 3 minutes of their life. His resident had materialized behind him. 2 nurses passing in the hall had slowed almost to a stop. He said, "This is..." He stopped. She said, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." He said, "I wasn't aware the appointment had been finalized." She said, "It was finalized on the 12th. She said it the way her grandmother used to hand you something she'd grown, matter-of-factly, because the fact was simply there. It didn't require emphasis." He put the letter on the table. He remained standing in the doorway. The room had a particular quality to it in that moment. The quality of a space waiting for something to be decided, and then the hallway outside filled with the sound of voices, and 3 department heads walked in together and 2 more followed, and Dr. Sandra Lynn came last, and Dr. Lynn looked at the head of the table where Diane was seated and she nodded once, briefly, and she sat down, and Dr. Whitfield was still standing in the doorway. He came in, he sat as far from the head of the table as the room allowed, which was 4 seats. He placed his hands flat on the table in front of him. He looked at the letter. He looked away from the letter. Diane opened the meeting. She had an agenda. She had prepared it the week before, during the 2 weeks she had used to bring herself fully up to speed on the department's current protocols, staffing structure, equipment maintenance schedule, and 6 outstanding items from the previous director's tenure that had been marked pending and had sat that way for an average of 11 months each. She had color-coded the agenda. She had distributed it by email at 8:45. She ran through it with the kind of precision that comes from 16 years of managing the most time-sensitive environment in a hospital. The space where a minute means something real, where the gap between prepared and unprepared is the gap between a good outcome and a catastrophic one. She gave Dr. Whitfield 2 action items from the 6 outstanding pending items. Both were in his domain. Both were things that should have been resolved under the previous administration and had not been. She assigned them with the same flat, administrative clarity she gave everyone else in the room. She gave him a deadline. She noted the deadline in the meeting minutes. He said nothing, but something in his posture had shifted, the particular shift of a person recalibrating, adjusting to a landscape that had turned out to be different from the one they expected. The meeting lasted 50 minutes. At the end, Dr. Lynn stayed behind. The room emptied and it was the 2 of them and the long oak table and the glass wall. Dr. Lynn said, "How was it?" Diane said, "Productive." She capped her pen. She said, "I'll need to speak with Dr. Whitfield separately about the 2 items I assigned." Dr. Lynn said, "Do you want me in that meeting?" Diane said, "No." Then she said, "Not yet." Then she almost smiled, and so did Dr. Lynn. Dr. Whitfield had made the comment at the suite doors in front of witnesses. It had been heard by his own resident, by 2 nurses, and by a surgical technician who had been passing at the end of the hall. Within 24 hours, the comment had been described to 4 other people. Within 48 hours, it was described to Diane directly by one of the nurses who had slowed almost to a stop in the hallway. Diane thanked the nurse for telling her. She wrote it down. She did not act on it immediately. She had a hospital to run. She ran it. Over the following 3 weeks she cleared 4 of the 6 pending items. She implemented a new handoff protocol on the overnight shift that reduced communication errors by a measurable amount in the first 2 weeks of operation. Not a large reduction, but real, and documented. She attended 2 surgical team briefings as an observer and submitted a written note to both surgeons with 2 specific operational suggestions. Both surgeons implemented both suggestions. One of them thanked her in writing. She brought the Whitfield comment to Human Resources on a Wednesday morning, 31 days after the meeting. She brought documentation, names, dates, what was said, who heard it. She brought it in a folder with a cover page. She was not angry when she sat down with the HR director. She was very clear. She said she was not bringing it to damage anyone. She was bringing it because the institution's formal processes existed for a reason, and she had made a professional commitment to use them. HR opened a formal review. The review took 3 weeks. It involved interviews with the witnesses, a review of Dr. Whitfield's personnel file, which contained, it turned out, 2 prior complaints from nursing staff that had been filed and closed without resolution notes. The same pattern as the closing and forgetting that happens when the person being complained about is valuable enough to the institution that accountability becomes inconvenient, and a formal meeting with Whitfield himself. The outcome of the review was a formal written reprimand placed in Dr. Whitfield's file. It was the kind of reprimand that would travel with him. He was required to complete training in workplace equity and professional conduct. He was required to meet with Diane in a structured conversation facilitated by an external mediator. He did. The conversation was not comfortable. It was not designed to be. What the review also produced was an institutional audit, not punitive, but structural, of the complaint records from nursing staff across the surgical division over the preceding 5 years. The audit found 16 complaints. 6 had been resolved. 10 had been closed without resolution. 8 of those 10 involved nursing staff who were women of color. That number, 8 out of 10, is not a pattern that appears by accident. The audit report used the word systemic. It used it carefully, and it used it accurately. The chief medical officer received the audit report. She brought it to the hospital board. The board established a standing patient and staff advocacy committee with representation from nursing, surgical staff, and administration. The committee had authority to review complaint handling processes and report directly to the board. Diane was asked to serve as one of its 3 co-chairs. She accepted. She also required, as a formal policy change in perioperative services, that department introductions follow a standardized protocol: name, title, role, qualifications. Every person entering or working in her department was introduced the same way. No exceptions. The protocol had a name. It was called the Standard Introduction. It cost nothing to implement, and it changed, in a small and daily and persistent way, the assumption of who belonged and who did not in every room it touched. Dr. Whitfield continued his surgical practice at Mercy General. He completed the required training. He completed the mediated conversation. He was, by all professional accounts, technically excellent at his work and had saved many lives and would continue to do so. He had also, over the course of his career, treated certain colleagues as invisible in a way that had its own cost, and now he knew that cost had been calculated and it was real. In the autumn of the following year, Mercy General opened a new perioperative simulation center for nursing education, the first of its kind in the region. Diane had written the proposal herself in a single weekend in March. She had submitted it to the board with a budget, a timeline, a list of partner institutions, and a letter of support from 4 department heads. The board approved it unanimously. The simulation center was named at Diane's request for a woman who had grown tomatoes in a small garden in Rosemont for 40 years and raised 12 grandchildren and never once been to a hospital. There is a small plaque on the wall outside the entrance. It says, Eugenia Okafor, who taught us that everything worth having takes tending. On the day the center opened, Diane wore the same white coat she had worn the morning she walked through those surgical suite doors. The ink mark was still above the left cuff. She had stopped trying to remove it. Her grandmother would have called it character. She thought her grandmother was probably right. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been told to find the cafeteria when you belonged at the table, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me, have you ever walked into a room and been dismissed before you opened your mouth? What did you do? What do you wish you'd done? Here's what really gets me about Diane Okafor. Not the appointment, not the meeting, the fact that she had been there for 16 years, in that hospital, doing work that kept people alive, the most critical work in the building, in the most time-sensitive environment that exists, and she was still told to find the cafeteria. That is not a moment of one man's carelessness. That is what a system looks like when it is decided, at every level and over a long time, that certain people are furniture. Diane did not explode. She did not collapse. She walked past him, sat down at the head of the table, and opened a meeting. And then, 31 days later, she opened a folder in an HR office and put the system through the process it had promised to use and never had. That is a different kind of power. It is the kind that endures. It is the kind that clears 10-year complaint backlogs and builds simulation centers and puts a plaque on a wall for a woman who grew tomatoes. What would you have done with that white coat and that letter in your pocket? Tell me in the comments.